Hi, I'm Barry Kislowitz, and welcome back to another episode of Leadership Lenses, a podcast designed for heads of school, principals, Rosh Yeshiva, and anyone else who wants to improve and enhance how Jewish day schools work. Today, we have a wonderfully fascinating guest with us, Rabbi Dr. Maury Grebenau, who is the director of the New Administrator Support Program at the Jewish New Teacher Project. For those of you who don't know, the Jewish New Teacher Project started somewhere around 20 years ago. I had the honor of being its first guinea pig class as a mentoring project for new teachers, helping experienced teachers learn how to support and mentor new teachers. It's grown, developed, and progressed over the last 2 decades. And one of the key steps in its development and growth has been the addition of Maury's program, focused not on teachers, but on new administrators. So, Maury, before we jump into all the questions I have piled up for you, tell us a little bit about this program. What do you do and what do you enjoy about it?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you, Barry, and thank you for having me. This is an honor and a pleasure. The Administrator Support Program is really designed to answer a need that we were hearing in the field, which is, what are you going to do for newer administrators? We also work with more veteran administrators, but the majority of our work is still with new administrators, and that particular juncture in their career where they're just starting to supervise or just starting to supervise teachers, particularly in a school, and all the challenges that come with that, and getting them into cohorts together, giving them both one-on-one coaching and also running workshops with them all together is very rewarding. It's very exciting to see them progress, and it's about a 20-month program, so you really get to see them progress quite a bit during that time, and it really is exciting and enjoyable to see what they're able to do and how different they look at the end of the program than when they started.
Amazing. And so I have a bunch of things to say here, but first of all, just a note of framing. If you're listening to this and you are a head of school, meaning you're dealing with the whole board, finance, governance, fundraising, as well as supervising the educational divisions, this is going to be a great opportunity for you to learn firsthand what those principals, new and experienced, whom you supervise, may be going through, thinking about, and to understand a little bit better how to work with them. If you are a principal or if you're a head of school who gets to run the educational side directly as well, then hopefully it'll be directed to you on that note. But I want to go back to what Maury said. You said, as people come in, they're new administrator. I like to call that moment the "what did I just do" moment, right? You signed the contract, it sinks in, you wake up the next morning. This has happened to me more than once in my career. And you're like, what did I just agree to? I have no idea how to do this. So is that where you're meeting some of these people? And what is it that's so intimidating?
Definitely sometimes, we hear a lot of, I don't know what I don't know. So even when we always do an intake with people to figure out, where are they and are we the right program for them? Can we help them? And a lot of times when you ask a newer administrator the question of, where do you want to grow? What do you want to do next? What will be helpful? What support do you need? They say, I don't know. And even when we're talking to them, sometimes a year in, they'll say, I'm so new that I'm just still in the overwhelmed phase. And I did my doctoral research in the experience of new principals in Jewish day schools. And that came out of my research also, that feeling of like drinking from the fire hose of just so many new tasks, complex tasks, and more needed to be done. You never finish the to-do list. And my own experience as a new principal, I hear frequently echoed, which is you tell yourself that if I just stay one more hour, then I'll get the to-do list done. And try to actually sometimes tell some of my coachees and try to dispel that myth earlier than happened for me. Or like on air, like, no, that is not true. I'm just staying later and later and seeing less and less of my family, and the to-do list still doesn't end. But they're firmly enmeshed in that difficulty, and it turns quickly into the other point that you mentioned, which is a lot of imposter syndrome of like, oh, maybe I'm not cut out for this. Like I can't do this. I can't do this well.
Right. So I want to break apart what you said because I think it's absolutely true. I also went through that new principal. So as a new principal, I just kept bringing more and more meals to work with me. I started out, I would, bring breakfast and maybe lunch, and then there came an afternoon snack. And by the time I was like bringing dinner and then the after dinner snack, I was like, maybe I'm here too long. Maybe I shouldn't be here long enough that I need to eat 5 meals during my workday. But you mentioned two things. You mentioned the pileup of tasks, right? And we know that the definition of overwhelm is when you don't have enough resources or you feel you don't have enough resources to meet the task at hand. So it's just that number of tasks and then the complexity of tasks. So can you share a little bit about how you guide principals to deal with each of those? And especially if there's anything you're like, oh, we've come onto this, or maybe it's emerged from the research, but people don't always get this.
Yeah. I mean, we've definitely found that really talking about time management and then delegation is very critical. Interestingly, we don't do it as one of the first things because for many they're actually so overwhelmed that it's even hard for them to talk in those terms. There's just so many things that they're learning, especially if they've moved to a new school. It's not uncommon. Their first principalship is not the school that they were a teacher in, so they have to learn about everything. Everything is new for them, and most, if not all, of the relationships are new for them too. And how important that is. We actually, one of the first things we talk about is building trust because of how incredibly important that is. But that also is new for them. Every relationship is new. So the idea of supervising people and each new supervisee and figuring out what they need and where maybe their next step is and how willing are they to take that next step. All of that is new. And so there's just so much that's so overwhelming to them. So at some point, well, kind of later in the first year, we do have a module where we really talk about time management and thinking about urgent and important, and that they're not the same thing, and thinking about the tasks that you're doing and recognizing things that should be delegated. And then you have to talk about delegation and why that's not so easy for leaders to do, and how to do that better. And but the complexity, I think, is also a really important piece because sometimes they come in as teachers. Usually they're moving from teacher into supervisor, and that can there's a lot of new skill sets that are needed. And also, I think sometimes as a teacher, you think that a piece will be more or less similar when you're an administrator, and then you find out that that's not accurate at all. One that comes to mind is a parent conversation. So you have a really talented teacher because they've gotten this position as an administrator, and they say, "Oh yeah, parents love me. This is going to be no problem." And then sometimes even with the same parents, if they're in the same school, sometimes they'll say, wow, parent never talked to me like that when I was a teacher. This is a whole different experience. And so they'll really kind of struggle with some of these tasks and some of these situations and how complex they are in a way that's very different than what they experienced as a teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. And I want to come back. There's so much in what you just said. I want to touch on that imposter syndrome piece, right? Because you come in, I remember one time I counted as a principal, I had 250 emails a day or something like that. And of course, they all have to be dealt with at some point. And how do you do that? And you're just kind of trying to climb out of that hole while you're thinking, they wouldn't have hired me if they knew that I really couldn't do this. Right. And so maybe I should stay till 9 or 10 or 11 o'clock at night to get all these emails done or to get these tasks accomplished, because otherwise they'll find out that I'm not who they thought I was. And then, everything comes crashing down. I recently was speaking with some clients where I saw a slightly different version of this, where the principal was basically saying, well, I have to be the following kind of leader because that's what people expect and want of me. And that's not even necessarily who I want to be, but I can't disappoint all those people. And I found myself in the place where I was trying to kind of raise the question with them of, well, do they really want you to be that person? Or have you kind of projected those expectations? And if they are the expectations, so what? How do we as leaders lead in a way that isn't completely bound by expectations of people who may have more or less exposure and understanding of what might move this whole thing forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes people will exert pressure for you to do something or to be a certain way. And they may honestly think that that is the right thing, but they may be wrong. So I also, when we talk a lot about change management also in year two, when they're a little bit more settled, and that's an important piece too, in the framework of like adaptive leadership, where you really have people will pressure you to do things a certain way. And then when you do it that way, against your better judgment, sometimes will blame you if it doesn't go well, even though they asked you to do that and they wanted you to do that. And so it is really important because you have this imposter syndrome to kind of recognize, okay, does this make sense? Am I just doing this because pressure is being put on me? And is that even right? Like, is this the right thing to do? And then who am I also? Is this something that I want to do? And a lot of these newer administrators also are not sure whether they want to be in this leadership position to begin with. There's something that pushed them to do it, but they're not sure if they're cut out for it. And so, you were talking before
And
about,
they missed the classroom, right? And we
yes,
all have that. We went into this because we love
very
teaching
significantly.
kids, and now we're like, we're away from that. And what happened?
Yes, for sure. And I think that even, you were talking about kind of the different populations, right? So there's the new administrator or the person who's thinking about being a new administrator who might be listening, and the heads of school. And I think it's very helpful to, first of all, normalize some of that. So people are very relieved when they hear that, the fact that I'm 3 months into a principalship and I think, oh my gosh, I have to go back to the classroom. This is crazy. And is a totally normal thought. It's very helpful for them to know that I'm not crazy. This is kind of a normal thing. And it's interesting having done this for a number of years now, from about 5 years, to see kind of the longer trajectory and see people who do in fact choose to go back to the classroom, but more often than not, people actually really appreciating other parts of the job that they didn't initially even know that they would appreciate, they didn't realize would be something that really drew them. And I think for heads of school also, a lot of these things are very important because of that imposter syndrome. And exactly like you were describing, is like, if my head of school knew how much I was struggling, that would be terrible. Like he would fire me immediately. Or if my head of school knew, that I wasn't sure how to handle this situation, I don't know if she would, if she would think that I'm the right person for the position anymore. And that sometimes holds them back from getting really important needed help from their head of school. And so it's really important, I think, as a head of school to take on some coaching pose with your newer administrator, and bring them in, and not just have updates about what's going on and all of those necessary conversations about what needs to happen, but what's going on, what's going well, what are some pain points, how can I help you with those pain points, which isn't always the natural conversation the head of school wants to have with this new administrator.
Right. Because the head of school is also overwhelmed, right? And hoping somebody's going to take something off their plate.
Right.
But yeah, as a head, you have to figure out how to say, I actually expect you to be telling me what you're struggling with. If you're in your first year of a principalship and you don't tell me you're struggling with anything, my assumption is that you're just not telling me, because nobody walks into the principalship and sail. But how long would you say it takes to learn the job of being a principal?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it does depend on the person. And we see people two very different trajectories. One is somebody who is moving up within the same school, and the other somebody who's coming in from outside of the school. And they have kind of two different sides of the coin in terms of what the biggest struggle is. So if they're coming up in the same school, they know so much about the school. That's kind of their superpower. And so that doesn't hit them as much. But they really struggle with moving from peer to supervisor. So being a supervisor anyway comes with quite a few challenges, and really feeling like, oh my gosh, I have to, that teacher's coming late and I'm the one who has to talk to them about that. It's really uncomfortable. But when you taught next door to them for 12 years, it comes much, much more uncomfortable.
And they knew that you also came late.
Right. Right.
And now you're going to tell them to come on time?
Exactly. Yeah. So that they really struggle with that. And that, it's less about kind of the timepiece, and more working through that, and becoming more comfortable with that yourself. And I always say more rather than comfortable, because, in a lot of ways, you never become comfortable with some of the parts of the job, but becoming more comfortable yourself, and then others are more comfortable for you. Whereas if you're coming from outside the school, I think there's a real significant difference in year 2 than in year 1, where before you've gone through the entire cycle of a year, it's really just hard to ever feel like you have your sea legs, because everything is just like this is just new. It's like, oh gosh, nobody told me that in the spring we do this. And nobody told me that, of course, I'm supposed to be working on that program, but nobody remembered to tell me because, oh gosh, we weren't thinking about the fact that you're new. So year 2, when both they've done everything once. And I think the other really important thing about year 2 is that they have a summer that they can actually use. So the summer before year 1, tends to, they utilize it, but they don't know what they're preparing for, like we were saying. And so that summer is kind of, you do the best you can, but it reminds me of me as a beginning teacher where I prepped so much. I had prepped for months in advance. And I was so excited that I had the whole year just mapped out. I knew everything was going to be great, great first year of teaching. And then after my first day in the classroom, I went home and was like, oh gosh, I
Oh,
prepped this,
yes.
and I did not understand what I needed to know about this. Is like, my master's in education was just like, oh no,
Yes.
this is
I threw everything out. I had like binders and binders. I went home, I was like, okay, these are going in the recycling, and
yes.
I guess I'm going to start from scratch.
Yes. My thinking of like, this is great because now I'll just have like my nights will be my own. Yeah. That's a one in the
Mhm.
trash for me. And it was like every night it's like, what am I going to do tomorrow? Oh my gosh. Like now I sort of understand what I actually have to do. But there is some piece of that, I think, because no matter what you
Right.
conceive
You're getting into the
principalship.
routine, and you're figuring things out. So I've
Yeah.
always I found this to be a tension that I've struggled with. Right. When you're dealing with a new principal or head or someone who's struggling, as a coach, on the one hand, I want to help them get that routine down. Like, let's not talk about shift. Let's not talk about pushing. Let's just do the basics, get things moving. But at the same time, as a principal or as a head, very little is basics, right? It's all
Mhm.
pretty complex stuff. And so I want to recall you quoted adaptive leadership earlier,
Mhm.
and I'll try and describe this as best I can. Adaptive leadership says that the leader, in many ways, tends to be the least free person in the room, the leader from an authority perspective, because there's expectations all around them. People that report to you, students, parents, people to whom you report if you're a middle manager, and that kind of puts the leader in a circle, right? So imagine yourself and you're like sitting in this bounded circle all around you. And then Heiditz and Linsky in adaptive leadership go on to suggest that what happens in that circle, in those bounds, is actually not leadership. Leadership is when you go out to the edge. Now, you can't go too far because you'll be done, but right. And I believe that the subtitle of their book was Leading While Staying Alive. So, like, they got that. But you want to go to that edge of where the expectations are to figure out what it is that you can give, how it is that you can effectively push. And I guess as I do this work more and more, I feel like that has to come earlier, because telling people that and helping them understand that gives them the permission to be them, and now go figure out what kind of principal you are, not what
Right.
kind of principal you're imagining all these other people want you to be.
Yeah, I think it's a really important framing of helping people early on recognize um, what are the things that are pushing them and what do they think. And I think a lot of the coaching is helping them recognize, name things for them. So when there's so much coming at them, they're drinking out of the fire hose. It's very hard for them to really even differentiate between, the tasks that I have to figure out how to do and get done versus I'm very uncomfortable on an emotional level with, this teacher who's pushing back against me, with the imposter syndrome, all those different pieces, and kind of helping them name some of them and say, okay, like, well, what kind of a leader do you want to be? What are you looking to do? What's getting in your way? How can we think about that? And that the relationships and the trust also is a very important piece. Like, we spend a lot of time on supervision and we frame it that way, that in year one, that can feel like something that you can put off a little bit, like, oh gosh, do I really have to go into classrooms and have conversations with teachers? I have too many other things that I have to do. And we often talk about the fact that, if you don't call the parent back, there's going to be trouble. If you don't have the report cards out, there's going to be trouble. If you don't go into the classroom, if you don't have that feedback conversation with the teacher, you live to see another day. It's really not so bad, at least in the short term. But the problem is exactly what you're describing, that if you don't establish yourself as a supervisional leader, aside from the fact that you're not going to learn what the teaching and learning looks like in your school, which is pretty critical, but you also are, run the risk of being what I call an armchair principal, where you're sitting in your seat and you're doing important things. And people are coming in and you're talking to them about the learning and the teaching and things like that, but you're not out. You're not out there. You're not having those relationships. You're not having your own ability to see what's going on in the classroom, to understand for each teacher and then for the school in general where the teaching and learning is at, and how you can add
Mhm.
value. And when you can position yourself that way, and teachers can say at the end of year one, hey, Barry knows me. Hey, Maury like understands what's going on here, and he's adding value. I'm having good conversations with him that's helping my teaching. That is incredible. And if you kind of go through the first year and they're like, I don't know what he does in his office all the time, that
Right.
it's a lot
Well,
harder to.
right. And flip that. I 100% agree. But even from that other perspective of, I know when I speak to heads and principals, the more time they are out of their office, the better they feel. Right. So
Mhm.
everything you're saying, I 100% agree with.
Yeah.
And it gives you a better sense of your leadership and your presence in your school. And it makes you feel so much better because, like we said, right, we started in the classroom. So you're not going into the classrooms to make yourself feel better, but you're going into the classrooms to be an educational leader, to connect with teachers, connect with kids. And when you do that, the more you do that, the more you just get that filled sensation of, this is meaningful work and I'm connected and I'm here and this is what I'm doing. And the fire hose sensation is great. I actually, right when you started, I was struck by this image of, yeah, lots of us are drinking from the fire hose and we don't necessarily even realize that we're the ones holding it in front of us. Right?
Mhm.
Like, who's making you drink from that fire hose? Why are you there? And
Yeah.
yes, you might have some other people that are kind of pushing you in front of the hose, but a lot of times it's us. Well, like, I have to do this and I have to do that and I have to do this. And what if I don't do that? And you're talking about freeing people to say, wait a second, let me think about how I am going to add value to this school in my role. And let me go do that and craft that. And other people will see that and I will feel that. And that puts me in a completely different place as a leader.
Yes. The proactive versus the reactive is a hard place to get to, but I think it is one of the most critical shifts where you're just kind of reacting to everything. And as you said, also a lot of it is self-imposed. It's that imposter syndrome, or that, well, this is what principals do. Um, and a further challenge that, came out of my research also is heard a lot of new principals talking about how the contours of the role and with expectations came from whoever occupied the role before them, which might have been a very different leader with very different strengths and very different weaknesses, but people were coming to them and expecting them to do things exactly as it was done before. And that puts a lot of pressure on them when they're saying, well, maybe that's the right way to do it. And all these things that I'm thinking and all these things that I'm noticing, maybe they're just wrong, and having them realize that one of the superpowers that you have as a new administrator, especially if you're in a new school, is you have a fresh pair of eyes, which can be incredible because you may see things and you might be able to ask questions that are really going to shift thinking. It's like, well, of course we do it that way. We've always done it that way. And really, because I'm having a hard time understanding why anybody would do it that way. Can you tell me more about that? And that can open up conversations like, well, I don't know. We've always done it that way. Like nobody's ever asked us that question before.
Yeah, yeah. And you have to get some John Cotter books to give out to everyone to
Yeah.
help them understand that. And I remember that myself, my first principal job, I took over from someone who was somewhat of a legend in the school until they had moved on. And definitely double-digit people in the month before I started said, "Oh, you're going to try and fill their shoes? Do you
Yeah.
think you can do that?" This was like at a Shabbat lunch or passing in the street. And I'm like, I think maybe I should move back where I came from because this doesn't seem like it's going to go well. And you're just saying, but there's that feeling, right? There really is that feeling with people of, how am I going to stand up to this? How am I going to live up to this? And
Yeah.
what I hear you saying in so many ways, and with this, maybe we'll kind of come to a close, is there are so many expectations from so many places, and understanding how to become your own leader according to your values, hearing the voices around you, all of your various stakeholders, but choosing your own path is crucial. And it's particularly hard for those who might be the second in charge, right? A principal who answers to a head. And I'll say this, directed to all the heads listening, think about that, what that means for all of the people that work for you in your senior leadership team, because those are conversations that we actually need to have, right? They're assuming you think things, you're assuming they think things. We need to actually outline what those expectations are and then
Mhm.
proactively decide, like you said, right, on the proactive side, how are we charting our own path as individual leaders and as leadership teams?
Yeah. And one of the very practical pieces of advice that we give heads of school is we hear a lot of lack of role clarity from principals, understandably, because it's, there's always a line in everyone's contract that says, and everything else that we need from you. And so the sense of what is my role and what are my priorities, going back to our original conversation of like, there's too much for me to do. So being able to be aligned with those on your leadership team of, let's talk about what your priorities are. Let's talk about these things. Let's talk about role clarity. And we tell them also not to, from both sides, don't think it's a failure of any kind if 6 months in you're meeting and you're relooking at the job description because you created this job description, then you hired somebody. That person is going to have their own challenges, their own strengths, and you're going to want to find out, what's going well, what's not going well, what feels like it's too much, where do you need help, and you want to really, as we were saying, like, go do that in a very proactive way. Set that time and be very clear that, hey, here's the job description, here's what we're going to try to do. We're going to check in on this in 6 months. We're going to check in on this at the end of the year. We're going to spend real time. Once the students are out of the building, we're going to spend real time, maybe even offsite, really going through year one. And like, I'm going to give you some feedback and you're give me feedback. We're really going to craft this and figure this out, because, if everything stays static, it's unlikely you're having those real conversations. It's unlikely that you're getting, you have to ask yourself, and they're saying like, yep, everything went as planned, exactly as we thought. Are you really getting to the bottom of what's actually going on, so that you really want to find out those things and make sure you have a relationship with your administrators where they feel like they can share with you when things are too much, or when there is different priorities that you think maybe we should consider.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'll say, in the various work I do with strategic plan and organizational structure work and all of those pieces with schools, it's a very small number of places that actually have effective roles laid out, that have them laid out in writing, and then that talk about them. And so I think there's a certain level of reluctance on the part of a head to start talking about role clarity, because they feel like, well, I should have this done already. I should have it down. I hired you. How do I not already know everything? And you don't. And that's fine. But the key is, you need to talk about it, think about it. And if you can co-construct with your leadership team what everyone's roles are, where the lines are. As I was told often by my mentor, you have to know where the lines are. And then sometimes you can color outside them, but you have to be constantly figuring out where those lines are. That can enable everyone to have that greater level of comfort. And I think a lot of what we've talked about is the underlying psychological, emotional challenge beyond the hundreds of emails and tasks, just that underlying emotional challenge, which can be make or break for a lot of our school leaders in whatever role they are. And so I'll say, in closing, I'm thrilled that they have someone like you, Maury, to go to, that JNTP is supporting beginning teachers. Again, I benefited from that. I'm still in touch with my own mentor from the program 20 years ago. And I'm thrilled that administrators have that. If you haven't checked them out and you're a principal or head of school, check out the Jewish New Teacher Project. It's jntp.org. Did I get that right?
You did.
Excellent. I visit the website often. And I'm sure Maury would be happy to hear from you if you are a new administrator, or if you're hiring or working with a new administrator that you think might benefit from that cohort program. Really, it's tremendous. If you're head or if you're a principal, we'd love to hear from you. Try these things out. Let us know what you think. Maury, thank you for joining us.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me, Barry.
And let us both know what you think. You can reach me, as always, Barry Kislowitz on LinkedIn. You can reach us via Leadership Lenses on Substack, or at our website, kislowitzconsulting.com.
Yes, and I'm M. Grebenau at jntp.org. You can find me on the website, and also always, as Barry said, happy to have conversations. We're here to support administrators. We work with veteran administrators as well. We have a cohort now for veterans as well. We want to focus on best practice in supervision. So always happy to have those conversations. And thank you again, Barry.
My pleasure. Thank you for being with us, Maury. And everybody listening, try it out. Let us know how it goes.